Yellow and Red Mix by Digis27, Chapter 17. Naruto just took a few seconds to really enjoy the soft crunching under his feet. It was remarkable to think how similar snow was to sand in the way it blanketed everything it could. At the same time, they were so difficult. While one was harsh and sometimes irritating, the other was soft, pure, and Naruto froze mid-step in the middle of his thought as he felt a cold, wet mass strike the side of his face. He turned angrily in time to see the three giggling shapes retreating into a nearby alleyway. He caught the tail of one of the young boy's scarf with his gaze as it whipped around the corner and sighed deeply. Naruto, normally he would have chased after the kids, returned their snowballs in an extremely unnecessary and exaggerated revenge. Luckily, the serenity of the night and the utterly tranquility of the soft snow just whirled around him had left him in a good mood. That, and he had somewhere to be. He continued on the path to the gates of the Inuzaka compound, muttering about Bratz and the inventor of the snowball, who he wanted to both congratulate and throttle. He smiled as he walked past Ninkin, happily rolling around in the snow, trying to disturb it as much as possible, only ending up covering their coats with it. Some days they made it particularly difficult to remind himself these were animals trained to kill on command with their partners. He entered the main house of the complex, wiping the last of the snowball's excess of his neck and out of his shirt. He could have floored Kyubi's chakra and evaporated the remains of the frozen ball, but he always felt like that was cheating. It also didn't help that every time he did so, the Ninkin would be put on edge for the rest of the day, severely annoying the handlers. Instead, he just allowed the warmth of the house to get rid of the last of the dampness from his person. He looked around, still smiling as he observed the festively decorated house. While not the most modern the depiction of Christmas, you could still tell that is what the household was celebrating. Wreaths of traditional plants like holly and ivy littered the walls, while the enticing aroma of festival puddings drifted through the house. For a household of smell-sensitive shinobi, that was one of the best parts, and Naruto had to agree with them. While the concept of Christmas itself was quite alien confusion to Naruto, he couldn't help but be caught up in everyone's good moods at this time of year. From what he knew, it was some kind of ancient religious tradition brought across from far-off Western lands and had quickly been accepted by the elemental nations. What was important to Jinchuriki was the well-established trading of gift-giving. Without snow, Christmas never had much impact in Wind Country, with residents barely taking notice of the baffling and somewhat pointless holiday. After all, it didn't really make much sense to have a day of festivals over a religion you took no part in, when at any minute you could be called on a mission that might threaten your life. Even so, now that he was in Konoha again, a big believer in Christmas festivals, he decided to fully immerse himself with the concept while he was here. This was the reason he had been wandering around since his early training had finished, trying to find everyone and give them their gifts. The first person he found was Tsunami, happily eating in the kitchen with Kuromaru, and not too far away, equally indulging in some festival dog food. Tsunami looked up as Naruto entered half-heartedly, wiping food from her mouth with her sleeve, while a kind-hearted woman once couldn't say Tsunami cared too much for manners. "Hi, Miss Inuzaka." Tsunami smiled and wearily shook her head at the title. "What have I told you, pup? Just call me Tsumi." Naruto wasn't too sure about that. He wasn't really one for addressing adults for their first names unless they were his sensei. Even then, he just gave them nicknames. He felt that it had been overly kind for Tatsumi to have him and his friends into their home, so he wanted to respect her. He instead decided to divert the topic of the conversation by bringing out a scroll from one of his many pockets and unsealing its contents. "Merry Christmas." He widened his smile as he held out the ball in front of him. While simple and rather plain, he had made sure it was toughened and sturdy, and this was a ball that would last a great deal of time. Tsumi just took the palm-sized white ball and held it in front of her before her own fair smile graced her lips. She looked down at the faithful companion of her over 15 years and tried to remember the last time she had simply gone outside and played fetch. It seemed like almost a lifetime ago, and the fond memories lightened her heart a little. Thank you, Naruto. This is very kind. She did actually mean that. It was a surprisingly thoughtful gift for somebody who had only known her for a couple of weeks. Or it was a really lucky guess. Have you seen Tajiya or Gaara? Tsumi was still looking at the ball when she shook her head. No, sorry, but they aren't in their rooms, if that helps. I had Hana check on them a while ago. Naruto just shrugged. He had only just started to look after all. Thanks anyway. He was already walking out of the door by the time Tsumi even looked up from her gift, remembering the last person to get her a gift so thoughtful at all this time, and Naruto had never even noticed the framed picture of a smiling red-haired woman and her spiking blonde-haired husband. Naruto was just glad to check a name off of his rather small list of people to give presents to. He made his way back out into the brisk night and stuck his hands into his pockets. Tsumi may have found his presence warming, but that didn't stop the young Jinchuriki from feeling the biting wind. He smiled again as he saw another name on his list walk by in the opposite direction. He didn't bother stopping to talk as he didn't want to keep Kiba busy, nor did he want to spend more time out in the cold than he had to. Hey Kiba, Merry Christmas! He had already pulled out the scroll and unsealed the gift by the time he called out. Kiba turned to look at the person who yelled at him, only to surprisingly catch the gift and see a mop of blonde hair disappear out of the compound's gates. He smiled before looking down at the gift, only for the grin to quickly mold into a frown. He stared down at the packet of dog biscuits before he let out a small chuckle, warily shaking his head in a manner his mother had done only minutes before. Naruto took to the rooftops as he raced across town. He knew it had been over 7 years since anybody in this village had even seen him, but he still didn't want to take any chances. The less people that saw him, the better. The way he saw it, he was only here for another month. Then he could get through the last stage of the exams and just go home. So he stuck to the shadows of the village. Not that it was really necessary being nighttime. It didn't take him all that long to make it to the temporary accommodations that the non-Konoha tuning the finalists were staying in. Temari and Kankuro could have gone home after they failed the second test, but they chose to stay to cheer off their little brother and their pseudo-siblings in the last round. Tayuya would occasionally come here to talk to Temari, and Gaara would likewise visit his siblings when he had some free time. As it was, he walked into Konkuro's room only to see the fledgling puppeteer fiddling with Crow alone. Naruto's sigh brought him out of his concentrated bubble, and he looked over, a little sheepish that he had been caught so engrossed in his work. He tidied up the spring-loaded trap he had been working on and swiveled in his seat. Hey Naruto, what's up? Naruto smiled. Trust Konkuro to be casual no matter what the situation was. Nothing much. You see Gaara or Tayuya? Kankuro shrugged, and Naruto could tell he was itching to get back to his work. Sorry, they were here earlier, but I don't know where they were going. Temari might know. Naruto nodded. That was his usual line to get people out of his hair so he could go back to his real friends. Naruto had never got puppetry. He always thought it left the user so open to attack if facing more than one opponent. He couldn't fault Kankuro though, the style that obviously worked for him so far. Discounting whatever it was that cost him the second test, he was walking out of the room when he remembered the second reason he had come at all. Oh yeah, nearly forgot. He quickly unsealed Kankuro's present as the older boy swiveled on the chair again. Naruto carefully passed the palm-sized vial of deep purple liquid over to his pseudo-brother, taking extra care not to spill a single drop. New poison. Merry Christmas. Now when you usually give a teenager a vial of deadly incurable poison for Christmas, they might react like this with disdain, annoyance, or, if you're lucky, indifference. Not Kankuro. He merely beamed like he'd gotten the largest pile of chocolate imaginable. Thanks, Naruto. The other boy didn't get to hear the rest as he was already out the door and heading across the small hallway to Tamari's room. He knocked this time, remembering the last time he barged into Tamari's room with a visible gulp. He hadn't thanked QB enough for his accelerating healing factor that day. Tamari admitted him with a strangely muffled shout, and he quickly found out why when he came in only to see her hastily pulling out some food in a drawer. She hated Konoha food, just preferring her more traditional dessert cuisine. It had actually been rather amusing when she had come to him a few days before they left and gotten him to steal copious amounts of said food into a few scrolls for her. He also noticed that she had her violin in her lap, obviously having been practicing. Yet again, it was another reason for her and Tayuya to be so competitive in their respective musical fields. While he would admit that Tamari's was just as good as Tayuya, he knew which one he would say if asked. He was just glad he hadn't been. What is it, Squirt? He chuckled internally. Tamara always came off as hardened, but he knew she was really soft on the inside. Sorry, speak up. I can't hear you. Most of the time. Hey, Tamara, you seen Gaara or Tayuya? She shook her head slowly. Nah, but they were in here about 20 minutes ago. A devious smile spread over her features. Why? You finally gonna make your move on the lucky little redhead? Naruto tried to scowl, but honestly, he couldn't be mad at Tamari right now. Her father had just died after all. Funny, Tamari. No, I just wanted to give them their presents. His eyes shot open a little in realization that he had completely forgotten once again. Before Tamari could comment, he had the scroll out yet again and was unsealing its contents in seconds. When the smoke cleared, a massive gleaming sickle was in Naruto's outstretched hands. When Tamari just stared at it, Naruto thought he would have to clarify. It's a new scythe for Kamatari. Again, Tamari just stared at the weapon blankly. Do you like it? That at least seemed to bring her out of it as she nodded lamely. Naruto simply smiled as he passed her the sickle, already heading out of the room before she recovered. Well, thanks for the information, Tamari. Merry Christmas. Up on the rooftops of the temporary accommodations building, Naruto was getting frustrated. He decided to track down his friends the old-fashioned way. He refamiliarized himself with their scents and went about discerning them from the surrounding aromas and smells that covered the village. Finally, he picked up Gaara's distinctive sandy smell, and he once again took off across the rooftops to reach his friend. What he found startled, confused, and amused the QB Jinchuriki. Gaara sitting in a stand, eating ramen. He read the sign over the small, otherwise unnoticeable stand, Ichiraku Ramen, and faintly remembered something about the name from his past. When it wouldn't quite take, he shrugged and sat down next to Gaara, not even startling the red-haired boy like he had been expecting Naruto all along. Hey, Gaara. The other boy merely nodded, still engrossed in the steaming noodles he was slowly devouring. See, Tayuya? Gaara nodded again, and Naruto waited for him to finish his mouthful. She left, said she was going to go look for you. Naruto groaned deeply. He had spent this whole time looking for her when he could have just stayed at the Inazaka compound and had her come to him. Well, at least he didn't forget to give Gaara his present, as he so congratulatory reminded himself as he pulled out the now almost exhausted scroll. Gaara watched him curiously, familiar with the concept of gift giving on Christmas, but not used to it. Naruto, we haven't celebrated Christmas even a single time in the past 7 years. Why did you get me a gift? Naruto just shrugged while smiling. Why not? As he said it, the scroll burst into a small cloud of smoke, revealing a medium-sized cloth bag, which Naruto happily handed over to Gaara. The one-tailed Jinchuriki peered inside. More than surprised by what he found inside, he poured out some of the gleaming dust onto his sand and curiously examined the shimmering particles. Gold dust. Naruto happily nodded before his smile turned a bit more melancholic. Yeah, I knew you wanted to practice your father's techniques, so he wasn't sure how to continue. The present had been planned before Gaara's father was killed, and now Naruto wasn't sure how Gaara would take it. He was relieved when Gaara simply poured the dust back into its bag and gave Naruto a small but genuine smile. There was definitely hints of sadness about his features, but in all he seemed grateful for the gift. Thank you, Naruto. This is very kind. Naruto just startled his friend by wrapping him in a warm hug. Normally his hand would have intercepted such full body contact, but it had lowered its defenses against Naruto a long time ago. Merry Christmas, Gaara. He pulled away from his slightly shocked and slightly happy friend. I'm going to go find Tayuya. See you later. Gaara just dumbly, still a little overwhelmed by the present from his oldest friend. 30 minutes later, Naruto was beginning to grow steadily more frustrated. He hadn't even caught a whiff of Tayuya, and he jumped about the village. Gaara's scent was easily discernible from a crowd so far from the desert, whilst Tayuya's cinnamon smell was much harder to pick out. Eventually, he found himself up on the Hokage monument on the scant chance that Tayuya had come up there to think or admire the view. In the end, that was what he ended up doing, just sitting up there on the head of one of the most powerful shinobi to ever live. Thinking, he thought back to some of his more cherished memories of him and Tayuya and Gaara. He thought ahead to the upcoming finals, his opponents, and respective fighting styles. In the end, he just idly mused on his life so far and smiled as he thought about the people that had managed to become so precious to him. He would gladly fight to his last breath in order to protect them. He smelt her before he heard her, but not even bothering to turn as she came over and sat down next to him, naturally sidling closer to him so she could lay her head down on his shoulder. "Hey, shithead, been looking all over the village for you." He chuckled lightly, and she felt the vibrations through her contact with him. "What's so funny?" He didn't bother turning to answer, maintaining his gaze over the lit-up streets that stretched out below them both. "I can say the same thing about you." She shifted her head up off his shoulder and looked at him with an inquisitive smile. "How so?" He turned to face her as well as she merely poked a solitary finger as she punctuated each of her words. "Because poke, I'm poke, not poke, poke, shithead." She finished with a sanctified grin that made Naruto forgive her for the poking instantly. He chuckled, and she let out her own small laugh, and she turned to him again. "So, why were you looking for me?" Naruto smiled deviously and took out the scroll for hopefully the last time that night. He channeled chakra into the last of the seals, and one bright white smoke cloud later, he was happily holding out her presents. She took the pouch first, obviously a replacement for the red belt pouch she kept her flute in. Naruto wasn't audacious enough to try and get Tayuya a replacement flute. She loved it after all, and he was the one who bought it for her in the first place. No amount of money can just up and replace that kind of sentimental value. Like its predecessor, the new pouch was red, only it was much darker, more akin to the color of her hair. Without replacing the flute itself, Naruto considered this the next best thing, and from the look into his eyes, she appreciated the gift as much as he hoped she would. It was in good condition, brand new, something that her old pouch definitely could not say. Tayuya almost looked like she would tear up, but she held them back until she took the second gift on the scroll. It was simple, nothing noteworthy or remarkable that would make it stand out. Even so, as soon as Naruto saw it, he knew it was almost made for Tayuya. Naruto was hardly the first person people went to for fashion advice, but he just knew that the simple black beanie would look good on Tayuya. She herself wasn't quite sure what to make of the hat. She had worn her bandana for as long as she remembered, even living in Suna. Tentatively, almost, she whipped off her headgear and pulled the hat over her unruly hair. It fit perfectly, just resting above where her ears would be if you could see them underneath her vibrant crimson mop. She had to give Naruto the fact that this thing was damn comfortable, and from the grin he was giving her, he had to at least think it looked good. Of course, she would be the judge of that in the end when she had a chance to see it in a mirror, but for now, it was warm and comfy and smelled a little bit like Naruto, so she kept it. "Thanks, Naruto." Naruto was too shocked to even smile. Luckily, Tayuya didn't see this, so as she turned her head away to look out over the village, as there almost always is with Tayuya, there was an ulterior motive to the movement. She as desperately trying to hide the blush that overcame her face over the realization that Naruto had made a genuinely nice and heartfelt gesture, and she had nothing to give him in return. She was frantically searching through her head for what she could do in this situation. She didn't have a gift in return, not even one she could escape him for a while and get. All the stores would be closed by now. She needed something something cheap, maybe even free, that she could just give him and get this over with. And unfortunately, nothing came to mind. Quickly, what do friends even get another friend on Christmas? What do girls give guys? It's alright if you don't get me anything, Taya. That isn't really the point. Taya wanted to run on him angrily. She hated how damn perceptive he could be sometimes. Naruto looked like he was about to continue the thought and unwittingly make her feel even guiltier. Instead, she did something that she hoped would shut him up and solve the problem at the same time. Naruto really hadn't expected anything in return or any of his for any of his gifts, so there was all the more surprise when he felt something soft press up against his lips briefly before pulling away. He just looked in shock at Taya, who looked back at him, seemingly in the same shock that he was. Taya, red invaded her cheeks as he spoke, and she forced herself to look away before Naruto saw any more. Naruto continued to stare at the side of her face, eyes a little unfocused as his brain redirected all resources in an attempt to work out what had just happened. It was Taya who spoke first, a hushed, high tone that Naruto thought he would never hear from her lips, not in the wildest of imaginations. Merry Christmas, Naruto. Before he could reply, she had stood up and had jumped off the monument. His eyes followed her until she was out of sight, still unable to move or speak as his brain overloaded slightly. Merry Christmas, Taya. End of chapter 17.